Hijackers took the plane. The flight attendant was a retired SEAL. "Sit down, honey, unless you want to see what this looks like when it goes off." He said it loud. Loud enough for the 11 passengers still conscious and watching from rows 9 through 20 to hear every syllable. Loud enough for the silence that followed to feel intentional and owned. The Glock 19 in his right hand caught the overhead cabin light as he turned it. Slow, theatrical, the way you turn a weapon when the turning is the message. The words dropped through the pressurized air of Flight 2247 like a blade falling across a quiet room, finding its edge. 41 passengers, a United 737, 34,000 feet, somewhere over the Rockies. Destination was supposed to be Seattle. Current destination, somewhere other than that. And everyone in the cabin had understood this fact within the previous 4 minutes. There were 3 of them. She had counted within 90 seconds of the first one standing up from 12C. 3, positioned at the forward bulkhead, the galley partition near row 18, and the port side emergency exit. A tactical distribution that was not the work of improvisation and was not the work of people who had not been trained by someone who thought seriously about sight lines and fields of fire. The man at row 14, the one who had spoken to her, wore a gray pullover and carried the pistol with the specific familiarity of extended practice. 6'1", 210 pounds, approximate. Right-handed. The Glock had an aftermarket trigger guard and a modified grip angle that she had clocked and filed in the part of her mind trained for exactly this kind of inventory in the first 2 seconds after he pulled it from under the seat in front of him. That part of her mind did not panic. It had been trained past panic over many years by people who regarded panic as a professional failure. Her name tag read Carter, flight attendant, assigned to this route for 18 months. That was the apparent biography. The real one was classified above the level accessible to anyone currently on this aircraft, including the 2 federal air marshals who were supposed to be in seats 7A and 22C respectively, and who were currently zip-tied and unconscious in the forward lavatory. The people who had planned this had known about the air marshals. They had planned for them specifically. That was a data point she had noted and filed without visible reaction when she confirmed their absence from the cabin at 14:11 local time. She was 33 years old, 5'6" in her regulation flats. Her hair was in a regulation bun, dark, neat, the kind of bun that takes under 2 minutes and holds under pressure. She wore no jewelry except a watch on her left wrist, black face, rubber strap, the kind that displays military time and has a second face for a second time zone, and looks, to most people, like a fitness device. She had been wearing it for 11 years. No one on any aircraft she had ever worked had thought to mention it. Her hands were visible and still. She stood at the galley partition with her expression arranged into the careful blankness of a frightened woman cooperating with an armed man. It was a good performance. She had given it before, in settings where the consequences of a bad performance were considerably more permanent than this one. She was not frightened. She was breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. There was a tattoo on the inside of her right forearm that her sleeve covered. It was small, precise. A single compass rose surrounded by 9 stars in a tight ring, with a serial number in numerals so small they required a specific kind of looking to read. The kind of tattoo that appears in one classified personnel database in the continental United States. A database that requires a key card and a retinal scan and a second passphrase to open. And that is not connected to any network accessible from this aircraft or this altitude. The tattoo did not exist in any record that the man in gray at row 14 could reach. It did not need to. It was not for him. In the rear galley, Behind the partition, at row 30, a man named Leonard Marsh sat in the fold-down jump seat with a cup of coffee that had been hot at 1350 and was now something else entirely. He was 62 years old. He was on this flight to visit his daughter in Seattle. She had a new baby, his first grandchild, which was the entire official purpose of his presence here. He had served 29 years as a combat controller with the 24th Special Tactics Squadron before a left knee, worn through more insertions than he would ever list in sequence, had made that career historical rather than current. He had been watching the woman they called Carter since the aircraft was somewhere over Nevada. It was not the uniform. It was the way she moved through the cabin during the pre-departure service. There is a way that people move when they are professionally accountable for a room, a systematic sweep, a constant peripheral update, a body position that never puts the room behind you if it can be avoided. Flight attendants learn a version of this. What she was doing was not a version. It was the original. He had done it himself for nearly 3 decades in rooms that were considerably less comfortable than a Boeing 737. He had been building a picture. When 12C stood up with the Glock, Leonard Marsh's hands went flat on his thighs. He did not move. He watched her face, not the face she was showing the man in gray, but the face beneath it, the one visible in the precise stillness of her shoulders and the calibrated steadiness of her breathing. And he understood, with the bone-deep certainty of a man whose survival instincts had been professionalized over 3 decades, that this situation had a variable its architects had not accounted for. His jaw tightened. His pen, which he had been using on a crossword, stopped moving. He waited, because waiting was the correct contribution. The man in gray had a name. She was almost certain of it. The tattoo on his right wrist, a specific combination of numerals and a stylized letter visible when he raised the weapon, matched a detail from an Interpol red notice she had reviewed 6 weeks earlier in a briefing room in Langley, the kind of briefing room that does not have windows and does not appear in building directories. His name was likely Malek Ferrara. He was the 3rd name on a list that had 4 names on it originally, and that had been reduced to 3 by an event in Brussels 14 months ago that was filed under a case number she did not need to look up, because she had memorized it. She was not here by accident. She was not a flight attendant by training. She was a flight attendant by assignment, and the assignment had been running for 18 months, and this was the day the assignment had been designed to produce. 18 months of pre-departure checks and beverage service and the specific choreography of an airplane cabin. All of it performed with the professionalism of someone who had trained for roles requiring a great deal more physical risk than hot coffee and a safety demonstration. She had been waiting for this for 18 months, and now it was here. And she was standing at the galley partition with her hands visible and her expression carefully wrong. And she was the most dangerous person on this aircraft by a margin she did not consider modest. He was competent. She gave him that. The initial phase had been clean, forward cabin controlled in under 4 minutes, air marshals neutralized before they could coordinate, sight lines established along the main aisle that made a direct approach to any of the 3 positions geometrically expensive. He had done his planning, and his planning was good, and it had not accounted for the variable that was standing at the galley partition with her hands visible and her expression carefully wrong. What his planning had not done, and this was the gap she had been examining since 1411, the way you examine a gap in a perimeter, looking for the load-bearing piece, was think carefully about the galley. The galley has walls. The galley has equipment not cataloged in any threat assessment document she had ever seen. A coffee pot at 185 degrees, a crash axe behind a breakaway panel at the aft partition, regulation equipment on every commercial aircraft, perpetually overlooked because it is always there, an emergency oxygen canister, 4 catering carts with steel frames, and approximately 40 kilos of combined mass on wheels that lock on command from the cart handle. 11 items she had inventoried in her first 4 seconds behind the partition, 5 of them immediately accessible, all of them useful in ways that would not appear in any customer-facing document about air travel. She was not planning to use them yet. Yet was a calculation. The calculation included the woman in 23B, who was working very hard to control her breathing, and was not entirely succeeding, diaphragm not fully engaged. The kind of shallow chest respiration that precedes a panic episode. The elderly man in 8A, with a cardiac history she knew about because she had reviewed the passenger manifest before departure, the way she reviewed all manifests, in the specific way that looks like routine diligence and is actually strategic risk assessment. The child in 31C, 6 years old, window seat, whose mother was gripping her hand with the white-knuckled precision of a person trying to transmit calm they did not currently possess. She had logged all 3 of them as priority variables before 12C had even stood up. She had logged everyone on this aircraft as a priority variable. That was the job, in the way that the job had always been the job. Not yet. Not while 3 positions were held and the aisle geometry was wrong, and her watch showed 14:19, and she had 51 minutes of timeline remaining before the aircraft's transponder behavior became anomalous enough to trigger an automatic FAA security flag from Denver Center. 51 minutes was more than enough. She had needed less than 4, and she had been in far worse rooms. She needed to move one of them first. The geometry required it. Leonard Marsh, in the jump seat at the rear galley, had been doing his own calculation. His picture had been building since somewhere over Nevada, and it was almost complete, and what it showed him was this. She was not waiting because she was afraid. She was waiting because she was counting. She was watching position 2 at the galley partition get incrementally more restless, and she was doing the specific arithmetic of a person who knows that a restless sentry is an inattentive sentry, and an inattentive sentry has a gap in their attention, and a gap is a door. He waited. He was very good at waiting. 29 years of being very good at waiting. At 14:19, position 2 shifted his weight for the 4th time in 8 minutes. He checked his phone, the second check in 5 minutes, which meant his focus on his zone was degrading in favor of monitoring the forward position. His eyes moved to the bulkhead. Once, twice in 35 seconds. The gap was there. "Excuse me," she said. He turned. She held up the coffee pot, full, 185 degrees, a detail that was going to matter in approximately 4 seconds, depending on how he responded. He asked for coffee. She nodded forward, toward the man in gray. Very specific about it. His eyes went to row 14 for 1 full second while he verified. 1 second. What she did with that second did not require a weapon, and did not require volume, and required only the application of principles that had been drilled into her muscle memory over many repetitions in training environments that bear no resemblance to a Boeing 737 galley, but that translate with complete fidelity. 2 contact points, a pivot at a precise angle, a rotational application of force that the human body is not designed to resist from that vector. He went down. She arranged his wrists with the specific care of someone who has been trained. That unnecessary injury is a marker of poor discipline. She checked his pulse, strong, regular. She stepped over him. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. The man at the emergency exit heard something that was not quite right and turned. He turned left. She was already on his right. The calculation took the same 4 seconds. He joined his colleague in the rear galley, wrists arranged, pulse verified. She was very precise about the pulse, trained to be precise about it, trained by people who regarded unnecessary harm as sloppy, and sloppiness as a professional failure, and professional failure as something that happened to other people who had not done the repetitions. Leonard Marsh, in the jump seat, watched both events. His expression was not quite surprise and not quite recognition. It was the internal settling of a picture that had been almost complete since Nevada and was now complete. He had not moved throughout. He had understood his role, one of the clearest, simplest roles in any dynamic situation. Stay still, stay out of the way, let the person running the problem run the problem. He had played this role before, in rooms very different from this one, for professionals whose names he had also never been permitted to ask. His coffee cup sat exactly where he had left it, at 1350. Cold, untouched, a small monument to correct judgment. The forward cabin did not know, yet, what had happened in the rear. The cabin was holding its silence. The specific silence of 41 people trying to produce as small a profile as possible. The kind of silence with weight and texture, and the low acoustic hum of held breath, multiplied by a crowd. The ventilation system moved recycled air through the filtered spaces between 34,000 feet and the Rockies below. She moved up the port aisle. She carried the weapon she had taken from position 3, a Sig Sauer P-320, modified in ways that would eventually interest 4 separate federal agencies. She kept it at her side, low, not pointed, not yet. The carpet beneath her feet was the specific dark blue of United's current livery, and she moved across it with a ground-covering efficiency that produced very little sound. And she was at row 10 before the man in gray had registered that his geometry had changed. He turned at row 10. His face went through a rapid sequence of calculations. He was good enough to know, immediately, that something was wrong. The absence of the sound and movement he should have been peripherally aware of from position 2 was wrong. And his own failure to notice that absence sooner was wrong. And the woman walking up the port aisle with her hands at her sides and her expression absolutely level was wrong in a way that his calculations were struggling to accommodate. He raised the Glock. "Where are—" "Down," she said. The word landed at a specific register, not the register of argument, not the register of appeal, the register of instruction delivered by someone who has given this instruction before and has never found it necessary to give it twice. 41 passengers heard it. The cabin heard it the way a room hears a sound that reorganizes everything. He did not go down. He was making the wrong calculation. He was calculating based on what she appeared to be, and what she appeared to be was a 5'6" woman in a blue uniform with her hair in a bun. And the Glock was telling him a story about force differential that his eyes seemed to confirm. And the story was that he still held the advantage. He was wrong about the advantage. She closed the distance in a way that did not match his model of how distance should close, which was the first problem he encountered. The second problem arrived approximately 1 second later and involved her left hand and his right wrist and a rotational application of force at an angle that did not leave room for the Glock to go anywhere except the floor of row 9. The third problem was that by the time the Glock hit the carpet, she was already behind him, and the knee she placed at a specific point on his spine communicated, with total physical authority and no volume whatsoever, that the question of his next movement was one he should approach with great deliberateness. He went still. The Glock was on the floor in row 9. Silence. From row 31, a child's voice, clear, carrying the full acoustic length of the aircraft without effort. "Mommy, she got him." The cabin exhaled, not all at once, in a wave, starting from the rows nearest her and moving backward, A rolling collective release that sounded like the aircraft itself had been holding its breath. Someone in row 16 started crying, the specific crying of relief rather than fear. The sound a body makes when it has been braced for a long time and is allowed to stop. The ventilation hummed. A tray table rattled in its unlocked position. A child's shoe made contact with an armrest. Leonard Marsh, in the rear galley, sat with his hands flat on his thighs and looked at the ceiling of the aircraft for 3 seconds. Then he picked up his coffee cup, set it back down, looked at the ceiling again. 34,000 feet. The Rockies below. A woman in a blue uniform standing over an armed man in row 10, and 41 passengers beginning to understand that the rules had changed again, changed back or changed forward, into something that looked a great deal like safety. This is the near-fail moment. The point where anyone watching from outside the aircraft would say, "She's done." 3 armed men, an aisle with no cover, air marshals already out, 41 civilians, no backup, game over. Except the people who designed that game did not account for every piece on the board. They counted 3 weapons, 2 air marshals, 41 passengers. They did not count the variable standing at the galley partition in a blue uniform, because the variable was not in any file they had access to, because the variable's real file was classified above their clearance level. They had been playing a game where the board they were looking at was not the whole board. Her watch showed 14:21. She had 49 minutes before the transponder flag. She needed less than 4. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. The FBI Aviation Security Response Team met the plane on the ground at Denver International at 15:38 local time, where air traffic control had directed the aircraft after the cockpit crew, locked in throughout the forward cabin event, aware from the intercom transmission at 14:22 that the situation had resolved, declared the emergency and began their descent. 3 tactical vehicles. An FAA liaison in a suit that had not been near a runway before today. A TSA critical incident representative. And a woman from an office whose business cards listed a title that did not describe her actual function. Deputy Director Sandra Voss was 57 years old. She had been in her actual function for 19 years. She stepped off the first vehicle third and crossed the tarmac with the directional certainty of someone who does not need a briefing, because she has been briefed since 14:22, and the briefing confirmed what she already knew was coming. She had known it was coming since 06 hour that morning, when a signal from a watch on a left wrist somewhere over Nevada had checked in on a frequency that does not appear in any public aviation database, telling her that the timeline was running and the asset was in position. She was there to extract the asset from the standard incident response before the standard incident response reached the questions that required classified answers. She had performed this extraction for this specific person twice before. She had performed it for others 17 times across 19 years. She was very efficient at it. The passengers deplaned first. 41 people moving with the specific urgency of people who have been given permission to stop being afraid and are accepting that permission immediately and completely. Some were weeping. Some were on their phones before they cleared the jet bridge. The woman from 23B sat down on a terminal seat and put her head in her hands and stayed there for a while, and no one told her to move. The child from 31C walked through the terminal holding her mother's hand, looking around with the wide-eyed curiosity of someone for whom this had been the most interesting day of her life. And the terrifying part had not entirely registered yet. The 3 men from 12C, the galley partition, and the port emergency exit were removed from the aircraft on separate gurneys by a medical response team that had been briefed not to ask the flight crew questions. They were conscious. They would remain so. She had been precise about that. Leonard Marsh was the last passenger off the aircraft. He waited in the rear jump seat while 41 people moved ahead of him, because the instinct that had kept him operational through Kandahar and Mosul and 3 locations, whose names did not appear in any unclassified document, told him to see how this ended. He watched through the jet bridge window. Voss met her at the door. No handshake. The economy of 2 professionals who have shared enough operational history that the social register is redundant. Voss handed over a phone. Carter looked at it for 4 seconds, the look of someone confirming information they already held against what the screen was showing them, and handed it back. Her sleeve had ridden up slightly as she passed the phone. The tattoo on her right forearm, the compass rose, the 9 stars, the serial number too small to read at distance, caught the jet bridge light for 2 seconds before her sleeve settled back into place. Voss saw it. She had seen it before. She said nothing about it because there was nothing to say about it that had not already been said in the classified briefing document that authorized the deployment. Something in Carter's posture shifted when Voss spoke next. A fractional release, barely visible, the kind that happens when operational focus releases by a single degree and the person underneath becomes briefly accessible. She looked at the jet bridge window, at the tarmac, at the afternoon light moving across the Rockies. The snow line on the western ridge held the last orange of the day. She breathed. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. The last time, for now. Marsh walked up the jet bridge. 12 feet away. He stopped because the instinct told him to stop, and he was not going to argue with that instinct. He looked at her. The specific look, professional to professional, no rank required, no introduction needed, that crosses the space between people who have operated in the same register even if they have never shared a room before. "Good work," he said. She looked at him. Her gaze landed on him completely and without hurry, the same way it had been landing on him since somewhere over Nevada. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," she said. He had not been addressed by that rank in 4 years. Something in his chest moved that he was not going to attempt to name, because naming it would require him to be a different kind of person than the kind he had always been, and he was too old to start. He nodded once. He walked up the jet bridge without looking back. Voss waited until the sound of his footsteps was gone. How did she know his rank? His hands. The grip on the armrests when he sat down, 29 years minimum, that kind of ground-in tension. Seating position confirmed the unit. Back to the wall, sight lines to both exits. 24th STS, almost certainly. She paused 1 beat. He didn't move until it was over. Voss absorbed this the way she absorbed most things, completely, without visible reaction, so storing it. She had worked with this woman for 6 years and had stopped being surprised by her somewhere around year 2. "Ferrara is confirmed," Carter said. "Was," Voss said. "Precisely. The past tense is a complete sentence." "Was," Carter agreed. "The Hamburg connection holds. He was the courier for the cell, the physical link between the Brussels financing and the operational team. The 4th name in the cell is someone who had access to the air marshal's seat assignments for this route. That's not public information. That's inside the TSA's manifest system, minimum GS-13 clearance, accessed within the last 6 weeks. She let that land. Someone in a building in Washington, Voss. Someone we've been sharing briefings with." Voss was already writing. "London," Carter said. "Then Hamburg. There's a cafe in Kreuzberg that went dark 12 days ago, same day the Tegel Customs photo was taken. Someone inside the cell went to ground. I need to know who they ran to." Voss closed her notepad. "Wheels up at 1900. Carter looked at the Rockies through the jet bridge window one more time. At the light, on the snow line. At the mountains that did not care about any of this and held their altitude regardless. The way large things hold what they are, regardless of what happens at their base. She picked up the bag that no one had thought to search, because flight attendants' bags are not the bags people think to search. And this had always been part of the calculation. She walked toward the terminal. Somewhere over the Atlantic, 5 hours later, she sat in a window seat, back to the wall, sight line to the aisle, with a cold coffee and a watch that showed 2 time zones. She looked at the Alps below, their peaks holding the last of the light and giving it back in long, cold angles. The specific orange of late afternoon at altitude, settling into the high ridge lines and releasing slowly, the way light releases from things that have held it long enough. She thought about the 4th name, the one without a face, the one who had known about Seat 7A and Seat 22C, who had known the air marshal rotation schedule for the Denver-Seattle route across a 6-week window, who had accessed information that required either a very specific clearance level or a very specific decision to betray the institution that issued that clearance level. Those were not the same kind of person. The first kind was a target. The second kind was a problem that went a great deal deeper than a target and left a great deal more damage behind it when it was finally pulled out. She had been tracking damage like that for 3 years. The original list had 4 names on it, and the original event, the one that had made the list necessary, had taken place in a city she was not permitted to name in any conversation that was not conducted at a classification level above everyone else currently on this aircraft. What had happened there had produced a list. The list had produced an assignment. The assignment had produced 18 months of beverage service at 34,000 feet, performed with the professionalism of someone whose actual skill set was considerably different from beverage service, but who had been trained to inhabit a role until the role became useful. The role had been very useful today. They had dismissed her uniform. They had forgotten that the uniform was the assignment. 3 names down, 1 to go. One person in a building in Washington who had decided, at some point in the last 18 months, that the institution they served was less important than whatever they were receiving in exchange for the manifest data of federal air marshal assignments. She was going to find out who that was. She was going to do it with the same patience and the same precision that had produced today's result. Quietly, without volume, in the specific way that justice operates when it is functioning correctly. Justice isn't loud, it's patient. 1 name in Hamburg, 1 photograph from a Tegel Customs database, pulled 6 weeks ago and sitting in a classified file in a building in Langley. A figure angled away from the camera with the practiced awareness of someone who knows precisely where the lenses are and what angles they cover. The posture of someone trained in counter-surveillance at a level that matched her own. Someone very good at not being found, which meant finding them would require a method they had not planned for. She was good at methods they had not planned for. This had been established fairly clearly as recently as several hours ago. She looked at the Alps. She drank the cold coffee. She set the cup down on the tray table and checked her watch. 21:44 local, 19:44 in London. Wheels down in 2 hours and 16 minutes. Tomorrow brings new ghosts to hunt. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVP Stories for more.